I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. 25 May's elections were a step in the right direction. As stated before they were conducted, the President of Russia, Mr. Vladimir Putin, we respect the elections of the Ukrainian people. However, we would stop short of euphoria, which our Western colleagues have demonstrated. Elections are not a panacea. In evaluating them and their consequences, there's a need to take into account those events which preceded them and the context in which they took place. We can't forget the havoc wreaked by those who opposed the legitimately elected president, as well as the coup d'etat, which was carried out with support from the outside and help from the national radical forces. We can't forget the tragedy of Odessa on 2nd May and Mariupol on 9 May. We can't remain deaf to the mortar fire in the southeast, where punitive operations are being carried out. We have to recognize that these elections were not totally free and democratic. For a number of candidates, there was strong influence brought to bear, including threat of physical violence, and some were forced to withdraw from the electoral race. The elections saw violent limitation of the press. The consolidation of people was essentially achieved through the marginalization of and terrorizing a number of regions and the spreading of anti-Russian propaganda. However, today, we can't just simply discuss the electoral processes in a certain country. The Security Council has a mandate of a totally different essence, that is, bearing primary responsibility for international peace and security. And when in a portion of Ukraine there's essentially war ongoing, we should be talking about how to put an end to the violence and to bring the situation onto a more peaceful front through negotiations with all parties. For Russia, this task is of particular importance, given that the military operations are taking place extremely close to our borders. Security Council members should call upon Kiev to finally acknowledge the need to take into account the interests of all citizens of the country, put a swift end to the punitive operations in the east and south. This is what is expected from the citizens, and this is what is required of Kiev in line with its obligations under the Geneva Declaration and the OSCE roadmap. This would allow for genuine nationwide dialogue for agreeing on constitutional reforms. Genuine dialogue is needed rather than punitive operations covered up by round tables without the participation of representatives of the east and west, east and south of the country. It is interesting that immediately after the elections, somehow the memorandum on peace and concord was somehow forgotten. Instead of seeking agreement for citizens, they're assaulted by insults. In all issues, Russia is blamed. There are calls for a swift end for the punitive operation by actually intensifying it. People are being pushed into the army and the so-called National Guard. And those who don't want to kill their own people are dealt with. There's increasing use of air assets, tanks, armored vehicles, and mortar guns. Chaotic shelling and artillery fire, it takes civilian targets, including schools and hospitals. Peaceful citizens, in spite of the calls of the leaders of besieged cities, are not allowed to leave military areas. There are no human corridors created, and the Ukrainian authorities are not taking any measures for the evacuation of children, nor allowing for the unification of separated families. The provision of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child of 1989 are violated, as well as the basic safeguard stipulated by Part 3 of Article 1 of the Additional Protocol Number 2 to the Geneva Convention. We regret to note that some council members continue in all ways possible to justify the military actions of the Kiev powers. Today, a colleague actually qualified as admirable in their restraint the activities here. We would like to say, you shall answer to God, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, there are many pieces of information in the press as well as videos regarding the use by the Ukrainian armed forces of helicopters with UN markings. The most recent case of was observed on 26 May in the Lugansk region. We would call upon the UN Secretariat to not be passive here. When UN rules are violated, they should deal with the issue and take active measures to put an end to such practices which discredit the UN. Just a negation of these facts by the Kiev authorities is not enough. The OSCE roadmap plans for an investigation of all cases of mass killings of people, but there's non-existent progress here. There's tamping down of the investigation of the 18 to 20 February incidents on the Maidan, including the sniper case. Our appeals were not heeded to conduct international investigations into the tragic events on 2 May in Odessa, when, as is well known, unidentified mortal chemical substances were used, as well as that on 9 May in Mariupol. The Ukrainian side is avoiding serious interaction with international structures on this issue. Members of the press have their lives threatened. They're not allowed to carry out their professional duties by the Ukrainian authorities, nor to investigate in the chaos in the country. Today, there was an incident regarding the detention of Russian journalists from the channel Life News, as well as their ill treatment in prisons. There are numerous cases of journalists not being able to come into the Ukraine. We would express our condolences to the family of the Italian journalist, as well as the Russian citizen who was accompanying him, who died as a result of the firing from the Ukrainian armed forces. We are seriously concerned about the situation regarding the OSCE observers. There was a Russian citizen in one of the groups. We will do everything that we can so as to seek out and ensure the liberation of those who have not yet been freed. We would nevertheless call attention to the fact that primary responsibility for the security of observers is borne by the host country, the Ukraine in this case. However, Kiev has not yet concluded the internal state procedures for the ratification of the Memorandum on Mutual Understanding with the OSCE, guaranteeing the inviolability of staff of international missions. Ambiguity in the status of OSCE observers working in Ukraine for more than 2 months brings with it a true threat to their security. Sir, in conclusion, we truly hope that 25 May's presidential elections nevertheless will be the beginning of a new, more constructive period in the internal political life of the Ukrainian state. However, for this, they must be backed by specific actions for broad national agreement. The Ukrainian politicians have many times violently scammed their people. We hope that this will not take place in the current most crucial period for the country. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the Republic of Korea. My delegation thanks Undersecretary General Jeffrey Feltman for his briefing. The Republic of Korea congratulates Ukraine on holding successful presidential elections on 25 May. We are pleased to note that the elections were carried out in a fair and transparent manner with a high turnout, despite the challenging security environment in eastern part of the country. We believe that this election represents a step forward in the de-escalation of tensions. In light of this, we call on all sides to respect the results of the election and cooperate with the newly elected president and his government. At the same time, we condemn election-related violence by illegal armed groups, including the forced closure of the District Election Commission and the intimidation of election officials. We hope that the Ukrainian government will now take this invaluable opportunity to lead an inclusive and transparent constitutional process that reflects the interests of all Ukrainian people, including minorities. In this regard, we welcome President-elect Petro Poroshenko's announcement to visit the eastern regions and to pursue cooperative solutions with all sides. In addition, the series of roundtables on national dialogue is also a welcoming development. We believe that this is essential for any sustainable solution to the crisis. Despite the positive steps, we remain deeply concerned over the continuing escalation of tensions in eastern Ukraine, including the recent fighting between the armed separatist groups and Ukrainian security forces. We are also concerned over the abduction of members of the OSCE monitoring missions near Donetsk. The safety and security of the members of the missions must be fully guaranteed. In conclusion, I would like to highlight that the stability and prosperity of Ukraine is critical not only to peace in Europe, but also for the international community. We once again reaffirm our full support for Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. I now resume my function as President of the Council. I give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for convening this meeting on the current situation in Ukraine. I thank Under-Secretary General Mr. Feldman for his briefing. I thank all of you for your support to the elections Ukraine hold on May 25th. Thank you for kind recommendations and encouragement what the new government and the President are planning to do to consolidate Ukraine. Thank you for sharing your assessments as to the elections, which are coinciding with the assessments of OSCE, one of the largest observing missions. OSCE stated that presidential elections in Ukraine on May 25 were free, democratic, and held in full conformity with national legislation and international standards. It became a historical success of the Ukrainian people and its democratic state. On 25th May, people confirmed their readiness to protect the native land from the existing external threats, desire for peace and European future, as well as absolute rejection of Russian aggression. The vast majority of Ukrainian citizens from all regions of the country, including from occupied Crimea, participated in the vote at more than 90% of the country's polling stations, thereby confirming full representativeness and legitimacy of their will. It is important that elections resulted crushed all anti-Ukrainian propaganda cliché. Were all the Ukrainian fascists, Nazis, if so-called ultranationalist candidates gained minimum support in the elections? Where are all phantom supporters of succession or federalization of Ukraine if almost 90% of voters from all regions of the country, including the occupied Crimea, casted their ballots for the candidates who stand for unitary Ukraine and its European integration? All participants of the presidential campaign acknowledged that it had been democratic and legitimate. Mr. Petro Poroshenko received major support in all regions of Ukraine, including eastern and southern regions, which confirms the strong will of the whole population of Ukraine for unity of the nation. President-elect got full legitimacy to fulfill his mandate on behalf of the entire Ukrainian nation. Among his top priorities is to achieve stabilization and reconciliation of the eastern regions of Ukraine, which suffered from Russian propaganda and illegal activities of Russian insurgents and mercenaries. President-elect has already announced his plans to visit Donbass right after his inauguration. This is a clear signal to everyone in the east of Ukraine that their voice will be heard as long as it is peaceful. Presidential campaign 2014 was conducted in times of social and political tensions, security challenges, which Ukraine faces for the first time in its modern history. Unfortunately, because of the occupation of the territory of Autonomous Republic of Crimea. There was no possibility to establish the electoral commissions and to conduct presidential elections in Crimea. At the same time, citizens of Ukraine who live in the occupied peninsula had opportunities to vote at the polling station in Kherson region, which neighbors Crimea, or at any other polling stations in the territory of Ukraine. The complex security situation in Donetsk and Lugansk significantly undermined the election process in these two cities. According to the statement of preliminary findings and conclusions by the International Election Observation Mission, you can find it in the integrity of the OSCE web page. Serious problem, quote, serious problems in Donetsk and Lugansk regions, including intrusion into the and forced eviction and closure of district elections commissions by armed groups, intimidation of election officials, including abductions, death threats, forced entry into private homes, seizure of equipment and election materials, and the shooting of a candidate proxy. These illegal actions constituted an attempt to prevent the election, deny citizens a fundamental right to freely participate and elect their chosen representative, end of quote. After the election, Kremlin officials promised to respect the choice of Ukrainian people. In light of what is happening now on the Russian-Ukrainian borders and in the region, we take it with a grain of salt. On May 21, May 24, May 26, dozens of armed people attacked the Ukrainian borders from the Russian side. 40 vehicles with armed people attempted to break through the Ukrainian frontiers from the Russian side. We still have not got a reasonable answer from the Russian side. What hundreds of the Chechens battalion people are doing in Ukraine? They are not concealing their identities. They speak freely with the reporters and admit that they came from Russia to protect interest. What interest Chechens are going to protect in Ukraine? Most probably Christian Orthodoxy or Slav ethnicity? The same question we raised demanding what hundreds of heavily armed Russian Cossacks are doing in Ukraine, particularly from formation of Wolf Centurion with a notorious past in the Second World War. They're also not concealing their identities as well, operating in Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. Before that, they were in the Crimea. Another question is why most leaders of the illegal self-proclaimed authorities on the territory of Donetsk and Lugansk regions are of Russian, or not origin, but citizenship. Alexander Borodai, self-proclaimed prime minister of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, is a Russian citizen from Moscow. Igor Strelkov, Girkin, military commander of terrorists in Slavyansk, is a Russian citizen and Russian military intelligence special force officer. Igor Bezler, military commander of terrorist group based in Gorlovka, is also a Russian citizen and colonel of Russian army, as he publicly admitted earlier. Who have authorized those Russian citizens to represent the people of Donbass, to speak on their behalf and calling them to sacrifice their lives and to kill their compatriots? On election day, May 25, the pro-Russian insurgent group attacked polling station in Novodyar. As a result of the fight, where one was killed, Ukrainian law enforcers detained a group of 13 persons whose leader appeared to be Russian citizen. Despite some hints on conciliatory rhetoric, our Russian neighbor, which happens to be one of the Security Council permanent members, continues aggression against a sovereign UN member state. In the wake of election, we witnessed another brutal violations of Ukrainian territory by armed insurgent groups from the Russian side. Despite warnings passed on by Ukrainians through diplomatic channels regarding concentration of up to 40 trucks with armed people on the border with Ukraine, Russia's side did not assume any measures to prevent their breakthrough into the territory of Ukraine. On May 27, about 4 a.m., the convoy consisting of several trucks and passengers cars made an attempt to cross the state border. After the exchange of fire with the Ukrainian border guard servicemen, part of the Russian motorcade managed to break through and went in the direction of the town of Antrasit. It happened while Russian border guards did absolutely nothing. Moreover, there is every reason to believe that the penetration of the armed people in the territory from Ukraine is organized and financed and encouraged from the Russian side. Furthermore, the Russian Federation has failed to condemn participation of Russian citizens in mercenaries activities in Ukraine and is doing nothing to prevent illegal penetration of armed groups from its territory, thus conniving such actions. In fact, we are dealing with uncovered aggression against Ukraine from the Russian side, with exporting instability into the territory of our country. At present, our law enforcement officers in eastern regions of Ukraine stand against skilled armed mercenaries who are ready to plunder, intimidate, torture, and murder Ukrainian citizens. Today, armed pro-Russian groupings started to attack peaceful citizens. They fired at the school and the residential area of Slavyansk. We have no sign of Russian condemnation of such acts. Instead, Russia has offered its humanitarian assistance to the population of the eastern Ukraine, referring to the alleged calls of local citizens and organizations. We would like to address to the Russian side. All Russia can do for people of eastern Ukraine is to cease its support to the illegal military formations. We appreciate Secretary General's mediation role, namely his recent statement on the peaceful settlement of the situation in eastern region of Ukraine. Ukrainian government stands for peaceful solution of the current situation. The peace can be achieved if Russian side would stop flood the professional mercenaries to Ukraine with the aim to destabilize situation in the eastern Ukraine and would stop encouragement of separatism. We call on Security Council and the international community to categorically demand from Russian Federation to cease the practice of provoking instability, to withdraw all formations of Russian armed forces, paramilitary organizations, groups, and their citizens from Ukraine, and to fulfill their obligations it undertook in accordance with the Geneva-Ukraine Agreement. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of... You want to speak? The representative of Russia has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give him the floor.
Thank you, President. You just looked at me, and so I decided to just say a few words. Of course, I just won't respond to this sort of selection of pseudo-facts, pseudo-evidence or evidence put forth by my Ukrainian colleague, but I just note that, yet again, the representative of the Ukraine is talking, but he doesn't note his own people. That is, he's making all these claims against Russia. The situation in which the east of the country is exploding after a coup d'etat which took place in Kiev on 22 February, that's the situation, and we all know that. And our Ukrainian colleague does too, but he just doesn't want to acknowledge that because he doesn't know what to tell the Ukrainian people. Now again, we heard the idea about Ukrainian unity, but we've already expressed our concerns in our statement, and I'm not going to repeat them. However, just blaming Russia is not going to solve the issues for the Ukrainian people. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for his statement. I'm not looking anyway. I give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
I will reply in Russian. Товарищ, вы прекрасно
As you know, the Ukrainian people are very patient. And we always find a solution of how to agree. But how so as to agree, there's a need for stability. In order to have stability, there can't be a stoking of instability. I did pose a question many times. That is, what are hundreds of Chechens doing, armed Chechens doing in the Ukraine? What did they come to do? To protect Ukrainian orthodoxy? Or the Slavic ethnicity? I asked why hundreds of Cossacks who were in Crimea came to destabilize the situation. It's not helping us resolve the problem, but rather destabilizes the situation. Moreover, this is not being hid. They're not hiding who they are. I wondered myself. The Wolf Centurion, which was established in the 1950s, and then created the Cossack corpus of the SS, what have they come to do? To fight the fascists, they who themselves espouse Nazism? It's not very clear. It's unclear to all of us. What might happen if in our country suddenly citizens of another country appeared? Some groups of 200 people called themselves a People's Republic and said that they were going to lead it. That's what happened in Donetsk. A Russian citizen called himself the Prime Minister. What does that help? Does it help dialogue? No. So today, when our sides have at least exchanged some views, and if we understand that there might be a solution as a result of bilateral dialogue, then we need to find a way to speak to these people, and we should. And why wouldn't you speak to them too? Why wouldn't you explain to them what you're doing in their country? It could be called as mercenary activities rather than assistance. That is stoking the flames of separatism. It's been going on for a long time. Yes, that's true. The government didn't do anything for 20 years. It's true that it's a depressed region. It's lacking in jobs. It's true there should be a state policy, and it's already been declared. But it needs to be fostered rather than undermined. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement. I give the floor to Russia.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, sir, it was useless that you were making ironic comments about the Chechens. I don't know. You might talk with them, and that might lead you to talk with the people in the southeast of the country, but let me just not get bogged down in that topic. I actually liked that at the very end of your remarks, you nevertheless did give an objective assessment of the events underway in the east of the country. You talked about the depressive nature of that region. That's what should be being talked about. But saying that artillery strikes and the bombings is not something that will solve the depression. I'm not sure if on Ukrainian TV showed this, but that when people, that when people came out on 11 May for the referendum, there was a high voter turnout. And nothing was done subsequently to engage in respectful dialogue with them after that. But if I don't know, if some events have occurred that have called your attention to the region, then I hope that will lead to constructive actions. But we haven't seen that. Stop these military actions, and then maybe we'd help you set up dialogue. That's what we've always said. That's what we've always said. That is, come on, let's set up dialogue, and Russia will help. Russia came to Geneva, and we created a document. But then what happened from the Ukrainian authorities in Kiev? We saw the conducting of punitive operations in a violation of the said agreement. So, on dialogue, we've always been ready. We've always been ready to help you set it up, establish it, and we stand ready to do so now. So we'll just hope that this military operation, as quickly as possible, will halt. Because how can we help you as long as it's ongoing? How can we help you with the east of the country when you're killing people? It's very difficult to talk about dialogue in such a context. You know, in our region, in our country, there's a lot that ties us to Ukraine. People have dual citizenship. Now, if somebody is a Russian citizen, doesn't mean he might not have 30 relatives living in Ukraine. So that's what I mean. It's very hard to say who's just Russian and who's just Ukrainian, and we all know that. But let's try to end this on a constructive note. We agree. There's a very difficult social and economic situation. You also talked about Crimea. Now, as you've posed a question, I would ask one. That is, why did you shut off the water in Crimea? Why did you shut off the water supply to Crimea? And the 25 years after the Ukrainian independence, and you say things are bad, but then you turn off the water. And, well, it's clear. The social and economic situation in the east of the country is bad. Let's try to solve it. Let's cooperate. Russia and the Ukraine cooperate. You remember those serious proposals we made, ongoing, even in the last minute before the coup d'etat on 22 February. So now you're saying, let's close the border with Russia, we'll get out of the CIS. Well, okay, you could do that. There won't be any free trade with us. But the issue of our bilateral relations or cooperation in our region, what we see for now, it's a military operation near the Russian border, and always fanning the flames of some kind of rhetoric, anti-Russian rhetoric or policy, and it's not constructive. So I hope that you carefully read the statements made by our government. They're very constructive. I hope you've carefully listened to our statement today, which in addition to the criticism that might have been there, it also contains a number of constructive ideas, which is part of our policy on the Ukraine. So we'd like to turn this page as quickly as possible, but much depends on you. And the first thing that needs to happen is put an end to this military chaos in the east of the country. Distinguished colleagues, I've already said this, but of course, hearing all of this was very difficult. The representative of Lithuania, you called that an Italian person was killed, but you didn't say he was killed by this whole way. The Italian journalist I'm talking about, this sort of way of doing when something happens by the Ukrainian armed forces, it's not spoken about. The distinguished representative of Luxembourg, who is well known, always says a lot about the humanitarian situation, didn't say much. I remember when we had the meeting on Crimea, when Ukrainian armed forces were killed, and some people thought that it was from Russian bullets, and then it was brought was made known that it was from a sniper bullets, and then the council expressed its condolences. Now dozens of people are being killed, including citizens, and some members of the council are saying that there's some sort of unique restraint being demonstrated by the Kiev authorities. So it's very surprising. Why are we meeting today? For the council to carry out its political function? Well, then let's see how to most quickly end violence. And here I heard yet another useful thing from my Ukrainian colleague, that he welcomed the mediation efforts of the Secretary General. Maybe indeed the Secretary General might immediately start trying to help a swift halting of violence in Ukraine. Let's do something concrete to put an end to all of it. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russia. I give the floor to Ukraine again.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again in Russian. Я услышал.
I've heard, distinguished colleague, what you've said, and I think that the easiest way to move forward would be the following. from your side. I mean, you told us what we have to do, so let me tell you what Russia should do. That is where the Russian government, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, or whoever decides, would make an appeal to your people, first and foremost to the Chechen leadership. And instead of conducting parades during the presidential elections, these hundreds of Chechens, they should actually immediately leave Ukraine. That's the first thing. Second appeal should be made to those Kazakhs. There are hundreds of them in Ukraine. Moreover, as I remember, there was a decision taken by the president regarding the participation of the Russian army. So there's a dual interpretation of their presence. So it would be really right for you to make an appeal to them, for them to leave the country as well. Perhaps you might appeal to citizens who don't know where they're going, and they become mercenaries. So it would also be right to warn them against what they might do. Now, on Crimea. We were in contact with the occupying power of Crimea on the issue of water. It's an economic problem. But the most pressing issue on Crimea is not resolved. That is, Crimea is Ukrainian territory, and we're going to have to resolve this issue regarding its return to Ukraine. This is our principled position, and nobody's rejecting Crimea. So I think that we could take a good look at this together. Thank you.
Thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement. This is a meeting of 15. We cannot continue with two representatives speaking continuously. So I'll give you one more floor. Okay.
Не зарекай.
So please don't be mad, sir. I'm not really sure how you want to engage in dialogue with us, but negotiations, we think, would be on a broad agenda of our relations, and they wouldn't be dictated or imposed by Kiev on 1, 2, 3, 4 points. No, would be a broad agenda on our relations, and I indeed think that our countries have great prospects for interrelations, so let's try to develop them constructively and as quickly as possible to find a way out of this most difficult time for our relations and a difficult time in the history of Ukraine. And as you know, Russia didn't bring about what happened in your country, but Russia continues to be ready to help you to find a solution, if you can find the right solution or make the right decision. Here, you decided to elect a president who will soon be taking up his mandate, and he has to take the right decisions rather than steps which would only lead to a stalemate in the future situation, the stalemate that currently exists. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The Security Council has thus concluded the present stage of its consideration of the item on its agenda. Meeting is adjourned.